Zremesher. So we're going to take a look at Zremesher, but it's hard to talk about Zremesher without also including Dynamesh, because they go in hand. So what I want to do is create a new geometry. I'm going to go over to I'm going to actually use one of my primitives. I'll go to Sphere 3D, and remember, before we do anything, we have to make it a polymesh 3D. So now that I've made it a polymesh 3D, I can go to my tool menu and then subtool. Oops, I'm sorry, geometry, which is below subtool, and let's go to Dynamesh. So if you look at Dynamesh, right below it you have Zremesher. So we're going to go to Dynamesh first. So we're just going to select Dynamesh, and notice that, let's do that once again with polyframe on so we can see the change in the surface. So if I go to Dynamesh, it completely changes the mesh. It equalizes the polygons so they're roughly the same size. And what this feature allows you to do are pretty amazing things, which is, if I go to my move brush, I can move this mesh around, and when I like the new shape, I can hold down Control and drag a box. Let me go back to my marquee so you guys don't miss that. Let's do that once again. So if I hold down Control and drag a box outside of the geometry, it'll update the geometry to the new shape. So it keeps the polygons, an average size over the shape of the geometry. So if I go and I compress this, and I've distorted the area, especially inside here, if I hold down Control and drag, it will then average them out or equalize the area and relaxes the area. So this way the geometry is not folding over or pinching or anything like that. So let's say we're making this unique shape and keep tweaking it and holding down Control. It'll do its best to retain those shapes. So we've gone from the sphere to this very different shape. Let's go and do one more adjustment here. I just want to make sure it doesn't look like a sphere anymore. Control drag. So now we have this kind of shape here, which is really cool. The idea is not to stop here. So most people I see, they use Dynamesh, but they continue to work in the Dynamesh. But the Dynamesh mesh is not really good for sculpting, because these triangles and quads, they tend to pinch, and the surface will never really be smooth. You'll have this very irregular surface as you start to sculpt. So if you notice that this little wrinkling that's happening up here, you can't really notice it now, but if I start to divide some more, you'll definitely notice it. Especially like here, we never really get smooth in those areas because the mesh is just too irregular. So what we can do at this stage is move it to Zremesher. So I'm going to turn off Dynamesh, go over to Zremesher, and with symmetry on, you want to make sure symmetry is on. I can see my 2 points on the surface, and I'm going to make my target polygon count as low as possible, and then hit Zremesh. See what it does. So in this process now, it's going to take the mesh from this really messy, strange quadded and triangular mesh into this very nice organized quadded mesh with edge loops and an edge flow that's going to be a little bit more specific to the shape. So around these corners and these pinched areas, we're going to have a better time. So here's the new mesh, and we lost some of the smoothness of the piece by going so low in the target polygon count, but this is the method I prefer, because it's always good to start with a really low mesh like this and then divide it and always have those subdivision levels. So as we divided it, you can see that this edge is beautiful now. You have polygons that have a nice edge flow over here. And so as you sculpt this area or anywhere on the model, you're going to get a much better result than if you were sculpting on the Dynamesh. And when you smooth it out, it just blends right in. So that's Zremesher. So you can go back and forth as much as you like. I can go back to Dynamesh as long as you don't have subdivision levels. I'm going to delete these lower levels. And here we wanted to add some more detail. So maybe I'll go back or change the overall shape, I should say. So maybe I want to go back and pull these out now. And then do something like that. And the control drag updates the mesh. So here we have the new organized mesh here. And then we can now go back to Zremesher and update the Zremesher. You'll get a nice clean mesh. This might take a little while, but basically that's the here we go. Should be any second now. I might as well just wait for this to finish out. So you don't want to be sculpting in the Dynamesh. I mean, I see a lot of people doing that, and it just takes a second. Go over to Zremesher, adjust the target polygon count, and make that mesh, and then sculpt on that mesh, and you'll be in much better shape. And if you know, even better, you'll have subdivision levels, which is key to ZBrush modeling. So here we have our edge loops in really nice places around these wing type things, and I can start sculpting. Very clean mesh, retopoed mesh right there, and one click of a button. There are some other features that can be used with Zremesher. So if you wanted to force a certain edge flow, you have something called Zremesher Guides. So if I go into the brushes and I click on Z to look at the Z brushes, we have Z Modeler, Z Project, and Zremesher Guides. So if I click on that and I make my brush smaller, I could actually draw on something of an edge flow. Like say I wanted the edges to go down this way. Let's get rid of that last one because they tend to snap in the center here. So if I wanted the flow to carry over like that, there's also something called curve strength. So you can turn this curve strength up because now that we've drawn curves on there, we want the topology to follow that. And if we hit Zremesher, it will do its best to conform to that. So now you see these edges are flowing back. So these lines here weren't there before. I'll undo that. So these edges were going across here, and then now that I added these curves, it's forcing the mesh to behave differently. This is hard to, you can't get 100% control out of it because the shape is dictating the edge flow, but it's a great way to influence the direction of the edge flow with these Zremesher guides. So you may want to explore that a bit, but that is the gist of Zremesh.